Orchestrated ambiguity, music and reality's illusions.
What truly defines your sense of self? I mean, really think about it. How do you experience something as subjective, as personal, as beauty? And maybe the biggest question right now, how is artificial intelligence fundamentally reshaping, well, both of those really human concepts? And not just them, but the very fabric of our society.
Yeah, these aren't just, abstract philosophical questions anymore, are they? They're hitting right at the core of what it means to be human, especially in this world that's becoming so digital, so infused with AI. It's pressing on us right now.
Absolutely. You've really hit on the central challenge there, and that's precisely what this deep dive is all about today.
We're going to try and uncover these intricate, sometimes really surprising connections between our inner world, consciousness, that sense of self we all grapple with, how we experience art or music.
Right, our aesthetic experiences.
Exactly. And then how that connects with the rapidly expanding external world of artificial intelligence and, importantly, its algorithms.
It sounds like a fascinating journey because these areas, they're not just sort of bumping into each other, are they? They're actively redefining each other.
In really profound and, sometimes quite unsettling ways.
So our mission today is to unpack a truly fascinating collection of academic sources, cutting-edge research. We're drawing from neuroscience, philosophy, computer science, quite a mix.
A real interdisciplinary effort.
We want to give you a clear, concise, and hopefully captivating understanding of these huge shifts. Think of it maybe as your shortcut to navigating the future of human experience.
Yeah, arming you with insights that might just change how you see yourself and maybe how you see the world around you, too.
To do that, we've pulled from some pretty rigorous academic journals. We're talking Frontiers in Neuroscience, the Journal of Strategic Information Systems, Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society B.
Serious stuff. But we'll also weave in insightful philosophical discussions, sharp analyses of AI's broader cultural impact. It's not just about skimming the surface of what's happening.
No, we want to drill down into why these developments matter directly to you, the individual trying to make sense of this new reality.
Okay, so where do we start?
Let's unpack this with our first major theme, the self. A shifting philosophical and scientific landscape. It sounds grand, but it gets right to the heart of it.
Okay.
For centuries, philosophers have grappled with this idea, the nature of the self. You probably intuitively think of yourself as this fixed, unchanging thing, right? The core of who you are.
It feels that way, doesn't it? Solid.
But our sources reveal this really lively and frankly, often quite intense debate about whether a self, as a single, unchanging entity, truly exists in the way we usually assume.
It's a powerful challenge to our everyday intuition, isn't it?
Yeah.
That feeling of I. We use that pronoun I so naturally as if it refers to something solid, stable.
Like a little person inside your head looking out.
Kinda, yeah.
Yeah.
But so many philosophical traditions, ancient and modern, really push back on that idea. Take Eastern philosophies, for instance, particularly Buddhism. They champion what's known as the no-self view.
Right, the Ant-Man concept.
Precisely. This perspective makes a distinction between our fleeting thoughts, our constantly changing feelings, the sensations that just come and go, and something else, a more fundamental underlying awareness that just observes all of this activity.
So the self isn't the thoughts or feelings, but the watcher.
Or maybe even that the watcher isn't a fixed thing either. The idea is that the self we perceive as this fixed entity is more like an illusion, a mental construct, maybe an aggregation of all these passing phenomena, rather than some enduring, unchanging core.
And it's fascinating because it's not just an Eastern idea, is it? Our sources highlight Western philosophers who made remarkably similar claims, sometimes centuries apart.
Absolutely. David Hume, the Scottish Enlightenment philosopher, famously argued, well, he said when he looked inward, introspected to try and find this self, he just couldn't pin down any persistent, identical entity.
Couldn't find the I.
Nope. All he could ever perceive, he said, was a bundle of perceptions, thoughts, emotions, memories, just constantly succeeding one another with incredible speed. It's like trying to grasp a river, You only get the water that's there in that instant.
That's a great analogy.
And then much more recently, you have the French post-structuralist Gilles Deleuze. He viewed change and impermanence, what he called difference, as the fundamental stuff of the universe.
So not fixed things, but constant becoming.
Exactly. For Deleuze, fixed identities, including this self we tend to cling to, are often too limited. They can't really grasp the complex, perpetually emerging nature of what we are. He saw these rigid concepts as potentially limiting our understanding of ourselves, boxing us in.
And then there's psychoanalysis weighing in, too.
Yeah, the Lacanian perspective is compelling. It takes a more psychological approach, less purely philosophical, but it kind of arrives at a similar conclusion about the self being elusive.
How so?
Well, Lacanian thought suggests our sense of self is deeply rooted in what's called an ego ideal. This is formed during the mirror stage in early
The
development.
mirror stage, like literally looking in a mirror.
It starts there, yeah. The idea is we begin to form our sense of I by identifying with an external image, literally our reflection, or maybe more figuratively, how others see us, the idealized image we project or want to project.
Okay.
But here's the twist, the paradox. Because our self is always already a reflection and identification with something outside of us, Lacan argues we can never truly be ourselves in some pure, authentic, unmediated way. It's always in a sense a performance or an identification with something.
Wow. So the self is inherently constructed based on an outside image.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, moving into modern philosophy and neuroscience. Let's talk about philosopher Thomas Metzinger and his ego tunnel theory.
Okay, the ego tunnel. Sounds intriguing.
Metzinger puts forward an eliminativist thesis. Now, that sounds maybe a bit scary.
Eliminating the self.
Sort of. It doesn't mean your experience of having a self isn't real. Clearly, you feel like you right now. That experience is undeniable. But he argues that the self, as a substantial, enduring nugget of reality, some fixed thing inside your head, that might actually be an illusion.
So the feeling is real, but the thing it refers to isn't.
That's the core idea. His ego tunnel theory suggests our conscious experience isn't a direct window onto reality. Instead, it's more like a virtual model, a dynamic internal simulation generated by our brain.
Like the Matrix.
Well, maybe less sinister, but the principle is similar. Our brain creates this highly personalized internal movie of reality, complete with a protagonist you, and we're always inside that movie, experiencing it as if it's the external objective truth.
Okay, so we're living in a simulation created by our own brain.
In a manner of speaking, yes. And the crucial part of this ego tunnel concept is that this virtual model is usually phenomenally transparent.
Phenomenally transparent, meaning?
Meaning you don't experience it as a model. You just look through it, as if you were in direct, immediate contact with reality itself. It feels completely real, utterly immediate, even though it's fundamentally a construct, a simulation generated by neural activity.
Like wearing perfectly clear glasses, you don't see the glasses, just the world through them.
Precisely. Your brain generates your entire conscious world, including your sense of self within it, but it doesn't feel like a generated world. It feels like, well, reality.
And what's really compelling is that there's empirical support for this, right? Stuff that shows just how malleable our self-perception actually is.
Exactly. Think about the classic rubber hand illusion. You've probably heard of it.
Yeah, where they trick you into thinking a rubber hand is yours.
That's the one. You hide a person's real hand, put a realistic fake hand where they can see it, and then you stroke both the hidden real hand and the visible fake hand simultaneously with paintbrushes. After just a short time, many people start to feel the sensation on the fake hand. They start to feel as though the rubber hand is actually their own hand. Some people will even flinch if you pretend to hit the rubber hand.
Wow. So our sense of body ownership is flexible.
Very flexible. It demonstrates how easily our self-perception, especially about our own body, can be constructed and how it's actually quite fallible. It's not as fixed as we intuitively assume. The brain is constantly building and updating its body map, its sense of self.
So if the brain can be tricked about something as basic as our own hand,
then maybe our more abstract sense of self is also a construction, potentially just as malleable or illusory. Metzinger himself takes this exploration even further. He delves into what he calls philosophical psychonautics.
philosophical psychonautics, like
Mm.
exploring the mind.
Exactly, but systematically, philosophically. He uses altered states of consciousness, things like out-of-body experiences, OBEs, lucid dreaming, to probe what he calls the unfathomable depth of our phenomenal state space, basically exploring all the possible ways consciousness can feel or be structured.
He actually induces these states.
He studies reports of them and even includes excerpts from his own dream journal in his work, detailing attempts to get verifiable observations during OBEs, trying to see something during an OBE that he couldn't otherwise know to test its reality.
Did it work?
The results are complex, often ambiguous. He describes experiences like gliding through a window, feeling tactile sensations that were clear but strangely lacked warmth or cold. It's more about exploring the structure of experience in these states.
And this raises ethical questions, I imagine.
Huge ones. This systematic philosophical probing, combined with modern pharmacology and neurotechnology, it opens up possibilities. What if we gain the ability, through drugs or devices, to reliably induce intense pleasure, or complete calm, profound spiritual epiphanies, or even selfless states, dissolving the ego tunnel on demand?
That sounds potentially amazing, but also terrifying.
Right. What does it mean for our agency, our choices, if we can just dial up euphoria or erase suffering? What's the value of striving or overcoming hardship if bliss is just a pill or a button press away? It forces us to ask what constitutes a good or meaningful life.
It really challenges our core values. Okay, so building on this idea, the self as dynamic, constructed, maybe even illusory, our sources introduce another very cutting-edge theoretical framework.
Yes, the metadynamic nature of consciousness.
Yeah.
Or MDAN.
MD and catchy.
Well, the idea is pretty radical. It moves beyond just thinking about consciousness as static states or even a simulated ego tunnel. It approaches consciousness as an active, ongoing process, almost like a verb rather than a noun.
Okay, consciousness is doing, not being.
Kind of. Emden proposes that consciousness isn't just about the states we're in, happy, sad, thinking about lunch, but about an underlying dynamism. A real fundamental pushing forwards that the theory posits actually causes the regularities we see in the universe.
Whoa, wait. Consciousness causes physical reality?
Not quite like that, but it suggests that the dynamism inherent in consciousness is a fundamental aspect of reality's causal structure. It's an anti-human view. Remember, Hume saw only correlations. Emdine says, no, there are real fundamental forces, real dynamism driving things, and consciousness involves a special kind of this dynamism.
Okay, dynamism. What's the core idea of Emdine then?
The core, and maybe the most mind-bending part, is metadynamism.
Metadynamism, okay.
This means that a conscious process is physically sensitive to its own dynamism, its own ongoing activity, its own pushing forward. Think of it like dynamism acting directly on dynamism itself. It's a kind of self-reference, a reflexivity, happening at a deep physical level.
It influences itself.
Yes. And more specifically, Emdine introduces this concept called pre-reflective auto-individuating autosensitivity, or praise.
Praise, okay, that's a mouthful.
It is. Don't get bogged down in the jargon, though.
Yeah.
The essence is this. A physical process at its most fundamental level is sensitive to its own existence as a distinct, separate unit, individuated from the world outside itself.
So it senses itself as itself.
Exactly. It's like a built-in self-sensing mechanism. And crucially, the theory argues this is a non-circular way to describe how consciousness is inherently aware of being itself, even before you consciously reflect on it or think, I am thinking. It's not a thought about the self. It's the very activity of being a self-sustaining, distinct process.
Okay, that's deep. What are the implications then for identity, causality?
Profound implications. It really shakes up some long-held assumptions. Emden puts forth what it calls a necessity claim. It basically says that consciousness must involve an appropriate arrangement of this auto-metadynamism, this self-sensing, self-propelling activity.
It's a requirement.
Yes. And that's coupled with a sufficiency conjecture, which proposes that such an arrangement actually constitutes phenomenality, the very feeling of what it's like to be conscious.
So this self-sensing dynamism is consciousness.
That's the conjecture. And here's a major consequence. Emden positions consciousness as having genuine causal power on the physical world. It's not just an epiphenomenon.
An epiphenomenon. Like steam from a train, a byproduct that doesn't actually drive the train.
Exactly. Many theories see consciousness that way, just along for the ride. Emden says no, consciousness actively influences physical reality through this metadynamism. And this causal power is itself a form of metacausation, a cause that acts on other causes, or on the causal process itself.
So consciousness isn't just watching the movie, it's maybe directing it a little.
Or at least fundamentally participating in how the movie unfolds. Yes, it's an active player.
This theory also challenges our intuitions about what makes my consciousness mine, right? The thought experiment with the brains.
Ah, yes, the diagonal consciousness problem. It's a fascinating challenge. Imagine you have, say, n identical brains. Each one is running a process we'd call conscious.
Okay, n identical conscious brains.
Now, if consciousness were only about the trajectory through different states, the sequence of experiences, the information content, you could theoretically string together little bits of the trajectory from each of these brains. Pop from brain 1 for a millisecond, then brain 2, then brain 3, and so on.
creating a diagonal process that jumps between brains.
Exactly. And from a purely informational state sequence perspective, this diagonal process might look identical to the process happening within any single brain.
But intuitively, that diagonal process doesn't feel like one consciousness. It feels like bits of many.
Precisely. And that's the rub. If we define consciousness just by these state trajectories, what the theory calls the ordinary states only view, how do we explain the unity of your experience? Why do your thoughts and feelings feel bound together as yours and not jumbled up with mine or someone else's or hopping between brains?
How does that view distinguish between what's internal to my conscious experience and what's external?
It struggles. It has trouble defining what's truly inside or intrinsic to the process in a way that guarantees sensitivity only to internal dynamics. Emden addresses this head-on. It says, the very act of auto-metadynamism, the self-sensing and self-individuating nature of the process, is what makes your consciousness distinctly yours. It grounds the unity of consciousness in its inherent self-causality and self-containment. It prevents it from being arbitrarily mixed up in a diagonal way.
So the self-sensing is the boundary.
That's a good way to put it. And Emden doesn't exist in isolation. It has potential links to other major theories.
Like integrated information theory, IIT.
Potentially, yes. IIT quantifies consciousness based on integrated information. Emden focuses more on the dynamics. There might be connections, or perhaps they describe different aspects. Same with quantum integrated information, QII, which involves quantum mechanics.
And you mentioned historical links, too.
Yes. The sources draw parallels back to German idealism, particularly Fichte's concept of self-acting activity, the idea of an activity acting upon itself as the very basis of the self. So while Emdad uses modern physics concepts, the core philosophical idea of a self-generating, self-aware process has a deep history.
Okay, that's a lot to digest about the self. If our sense of self is this dynamic, constructed, maybe even illusory thing grounded in complex dynamics, how does that shift how we experience the world, especially something like beauty?
That's the perfect transition. Let's turn to aesthetics. From sensory pleasure to neural circuits.
Right, because aesthetic experiences, as our sources highlight, they're much more than just saying, oh, that's pretty.
Absolutely. They involve appreciating an object for its own sake, focusing on its sensory qualities, how it looks, sounds, feels. And typically this results in a unique kind of pleasure, one that's strangely detached from practical concerns. It's not about what the painting or the music does for you functionally, but what it is in itself.
A kind of disinterested pleasure.
Exactly. That term is key. This pleasure often involves what's called selfless absorption. You get completely immersed, lose track of time, maybe even forget yourself for a moment. It allows for imaginative freedom, a free play, as Kant called it, of your mental faculty, sense, imagination, understanding going beyond just passively receiving sensory input.
And there's often a sense that this feeling is appropriate, like the object deserves it.
Yes, that's the normative aspect. It's not just, I happen to like this, but often carries a subtle implication that this should be appreciated or this response is fitting. It suggests a kind of value beyond mere personal preference.
Which leads right into that core debate in aesthetics. Are these judgments objective?
Yeah.
Universal or just personal feelings?
The classic objectivist versus subjectivist debate. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder versus some things are just objectively beautiful.
And Kant offered a middle ground.
He did, with his wonderfully nuanced concept of subjective universality. He argued aesthetic judgments are subjective. They arise from our internal feeling of pleasure or displeasure. But, he claimed, they also have a universal character, in the sense that when we judge something beautiful, we feel that others ought to share our appreciation. We demand agreement, even though we can't prove it logically.
So it's a personal feeling, but one we expect others to share.
And it's disinterested, remember, not based on personal gain or practical use. And it involves that harmonious interplay of our senses, imagination, and understanding. It's a complex feeling, but one that feels, in a way, universally valid, even if rooted in subjective experience.
And now science is getting involved in studying this field.
Oh, absolutely. The field has evolved dramatically, especially with the rise of empirical aesthetics and, more recently, neuroaesthetics. We can actually trace the scientific study way back to Gustav Fechner in 1876.
Fechner, he started psychophysics, right?
Yeah, that's him. He pioneered studying the quantifiable link between physical stimuli, light intensity, sound frequency, and our resulting sensations, and trying to link that to neural activity. He laid the scientific groundwork for understanding how our brains process things we find aesthetically pleasing.
And then neuroaesthetics took off more recently.
Big time, in the late 1990s. Neuroaesthetics is the direct empirical study of brain responses associated with aesthetic experiences. Researchers today use incredibly sophisticated methods.
Like brain scans.
Yep. Functional MRI, fMRI, which tracks blood flow to active brain areas. EEG electroencephalography, which measures electrical brain waves. They also track eye movements to see what people focus on, and even measure tiny facial muscle responses, like a faint smile, to gauge emotional reactions.
So they can literally see your brain reacting to art.
Pretty much. There's fascinating NSF-funded research by Contreras Vidal, for example. His team is collecting neural data from people while they're actually in museums, looking at paintings, drawings, watching dance performances. They're bringing the lab right into the gallery.
That's incredible. What do they do with that data?
What's really innovative is how it creates a feedback loop. Museum officials can get real-time insights. What pieces do people linger on? What evokes strong neural responses? What seems to have the most impact? Imagine curators fine-tuning exhibits based on actual brain data.
Wow. And the participants.
They even get to see their own EEG recordings in real time, often for the first time. It's like seeing their own neural orchestra responding to the art. It's this amazing intersection of science, art, and engineering, deepening our understanding of how humans interact with creativity.
Music seems like a particularly good area for this research.
It's an incredibly rich window into aesthetic pleasure, absolutely. Recent groundbreaking work, like a 2023 study by Gold and colleagues in Frontiers in Neuroscience, has shown very precisely how enjoying music consistently lights up key brain structures.
Which ones?
They found consistent activity in the right superior temporal gyrus, the RSTG, which is crucial for processing complex sounds like music. And importantly, the ventral striatum, or VS. That's a core part of the brain's reward circuit. It lights up when we experience pleasure, whether from food, money, or apparently beautiful music.
So listening to music you like gives you a dopamine hit, essentially.
It seems strongly linked to that reward system, yes. But what's truly fascinating is why. This study revealed that musical preferences aren't just about the melodies or harmonies themselves. How much we enjoy music varies significantly based on two key things. Our uncertainty about what's coming next in the music.
Like anticipation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And our surprise about what just happened, how the music deviated from what we implicitly predicted.
So the brain likes surprises, but maybe not too much surprise.
It seems to be about the interplay. The researchers found that activity in the ventral striatum, that reward center, directly mirrors the pleasure of musical surprise. And thus stronger the pleasure reported, the stronger the correlation with VS activity.
Interesting. Why would surprise be rewarding?
This provides really strong support for what are called predictive neural processing theories. The idea is that our brains are constantly automatically making predictions about everything in our environment, including music. And there seems to be an intrinsic reward in forming, testing, and updating these predictions.
Learning is rewarding in itself.
Exactly. So the pleasure we get from music might actually be tied to how our brain successfully learns and predicts its structure, continually refining its internal models. Every time it processes a surprising twist that still makes sense within the musical context, it gets a little reward signal. I figured that out.
That makes sense, but taste is still personal, right? Not everyone likes the same surprises.
Hugely personal. And while our brains might be wired for this prediction-reward cycle, research also clearly shows individual taste plays a massive role in aesthetic judgments. It contributes significantly more than some kind of shared universal standard of beauty.
How much more?
Well, one example cited is face attractiveness. Individual taste accounts for about 50% of the variance in how people rate faces. So quite a bit of personal preference there.
Okay.
But here's a surprising twist. For liking abstract art, individual taste apparently accounts for only about 10% of the variance.
Only 10%? That seems backward. I think abstract art would be more subjective.
It's counterintuitive, isn't it? It suggests that while general preferences exist, maybe the rules or common factors driving liking for abstract art are less defined or universally agreed upon, leaving. Well, it's complex. But the overall point is, it really challenges the idea of simple, universal aesthetic rules and underscores how deeply subjective much of our aesthetic experience remains. Individual history, culture, exposure, it all plays in.
Right, and neuroaesthetics isn't just about fine art or classical music anymore.
Definitely not. The sources really emphasize broadening the scope, applying these methods and insights to a wider range of sensory phenomena in everyday life. Product design, architecture, nature scenes, even the interfaces we use online.
So understanding why we find anything appealing or engaging.
Precisely. and doing it through a truly interdisciplinary lens, integrating biology, psychology, and crucially, recognizing the social context. Studying aesthetic appreciation in the real-world museum visitors, concert audiences, not just with isolated stimuli in a lab, getting at the full, messy, human experience.
This connects to music cognition too, right? The parallels with language.
Seamlessly. Music cognition is a whole field looking at these deep parallels. How are music and language processed similarly or differently in the brain? Researchers use computational models, often inspired by biology, like neural networks, to understand how we represent musical knowledge, perceive it, perform it, even generate it.
Performing music seems incredibly complex cognitively.
Oh, it is. Think about it. It requires these incredibly intricate, real-time interactions between motor systems, hands, fingers, voice, and auditory systems, hearing and responding. It's this constant high-speed dance between action and perception. Neural networks are actually helping us model and understand that amazing sensor-motor interplay.
Okay, so our understanding of self and aesthetics is getting incredibly sophisticated, tying philosophy to neuroscience. Now let's pivot. How does AI crash this party?
Crash the party is one way to put it. Let's dive into AI and the transformation of art and experience. This is where those philosophical and neurological insights are colliding, sometimes quite dramatically, with AI advancements.
And the big driver here is generative AI.
Absolutely. Fueled by things like the transformer architecture, which came out in 2017, a real game changer, and the explosion of large language models, LLMs that followed, GPT, ChatGPT, these kinds of systems.
Trained on just unbelievable amounts of data.
Colossal amounts, vast swaths of the internet, basically. And they use that to produce human-like responses, text, code, images, music, you name it.
Their capabilities are pretty staggering, creating things that seemed like science fiction just a few years ago. But they have their quirks too, right?
Oh, definitely. Text-to-image generators like DALL-E or Midjourney. They can produce these remarkably sincere, almost deadpan responses to prompts. They just combine bits and pieces into novel images without any real artistic intent, just following the instructions.
Like a cat in a spacesuit riding a skateboard on Mars.
Exactly. And it delivers a plausible, sometimes amazing image. But, as the sources point out, especially initially, they struggled profoundly with certain nuances. Human hands were famously difficult. They'd often come out with too many fingers or just looking wrong.
The uncanny valley of AI hands.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And while they're getting much better, the outputs, whether text or image, typically lack real humor, genuine emotion, or sentimentality. They combine information algorithmically. They don't understand the meaning or feel the emotional weight the way a human creator or viewer does.
Which leads directly to that big, thorny question. Is any of this AI sentient, conscious?
Yeah, that debate flares up constantly. You hear claims like those around Google's Lambda chatbot a while back, suggesting they might be showing signs of consciousness.
But the consensus is...
The overwhelming scientific consensus, in Google's own stated position, is a clear no. These systems are incredibly sophisticated mimics. They imitate conversation, they imitate reasoning, based on the patterns they learned from trillions of examples in their training data.
So they're like super advanced parrots.
Or maybe like incredibly talented actors, as one source put it. They can deliver a line perfectly, portray an emotion convincingly, but they don't feel it. There's no shared understanding, no genuine emotion, no self-awareness driving it. It's pattern matching and prediction on a massive scale, creating a powerful illusion of understanding.
Which brings us to the impact on human artists. This is a huge concern.
Truly urgent questions. If AI can generate images, music, text this proficiently, how do human artists survive financially? What do they even sell? Especially visual artists whose market has traditionally been based on unique, handmade objects.
It feels like an existential threat to their livelihood.
It really does. It challenges the very definition of artistic work and value that's existed for centuries.
This connects back to Walter Benjamin, doesn't it? His idea of the aura.
Absolutely prescient. Benjamin argued that the unique aura of an artwork, its presence in time and space, its authenticity, its history, gets lost in mechanical reproduction, like photographs or prints.
And now AI generation takes that even further.
Our sources draw a compelling contrast. Think about a handmade painting. Under a magnifying glass, the paint has texture, depth, endless resolution in a way. Every brushstroke is unique. Compare that to the pixelated finite resolution of an AI image or a digital reproduction on a screen.
It's fundamentally different.
It signals what one source calls a flattening of the field. Those traditional hierarchies based on the value of materials, the time and skill invested, the artist's expertise are being replaced by new hierarchies based simply on attention and price. How much buzz does it generate? How much can you sell it for, regardless of how it was made?
It sounds like a strange mix of high-tech and Duchamp's ready-mades.
Exactly. Duchamp challenged art by presenting ordinary objects as art. Now, AI challenges it by generating potentially infinite art with minimal human effort. It marries that conceptual challenge with the unlimited scalability of digital technology. If anything can be generated instantly and infinitely, what value remains in the unique human-made original?
But can AI really replicate human creativity? The sources seem skeptical.
Deeply skeptical about replicating the core drives. Things like idealism, romanticism, that burning curiosity, the search for meaning, the need for self-expression. These seem fundamentally human.
AI doesn't have angst.
Exactly. Human art making involves friction, as one source puts it. Vague feelings, unrelated ideas bubbling up, unspoken bodily memories, the struggle with the materials. AI lacks all that. It doesn't brood. It doesn't have a biography. It doesn't feel the pressure of mortality. It just processes prompts based on data.
So is a machine's image even art then, without a human involved?
That's the argument presented. No. An artificial artist can't make the claim on its own. It has no platform in the human sense, no real relationship to our past, present, or future. Art, in this view, is fundamentally a game between humans.
A game between humans.
Meaning, a person becomes an artist by deciding to make something they call art, taking responsibility for it, and putting it into a human cultural conversation. The AI is a tool, perhaps, but not the artist itself.
Which raises a hopeful possibility. Maybe AI frees up human artists.
That's the interesting counterpoint. What if, instead of replacing artists, AI handles the more mechanical or derivative aspects, freeing humans to focus even more intensely on art's core function, which is creating meaning through that uniquely human effort, struggle, friction, and lived experience?
Using AI as a tool, not an oracle.
Perhaps. And it also opens doors for genuinely new forms of expression. Instead of just trying to make AI music sound exactly like human music, what about music that could only be made by an AI? Something reflecting its non-human origins, its different way of processing sound and structure?
Music that sounds alien, but interesting.
Potentially. That would be truly novel, expanding our aesthetic landscape rather than just replicating it, forging a genuine bridge between machine expression and human interpretation.
The legal side of this is messy too. Authorship. Copyright.
Immensely messy and evolving incredibly fast. It echoes that prediction David Bowie made back in 2002.
Bowie predicted the end of copyright.
He suggested copyright and authorship might essentially disappear within 10 years because of the internet. He was a bit off on the timing, maybe, but the pressure he foresaw is definitely here now, massively amplified by AI.
We're seeing that in court, right? The New York Times lawsuit.
Exactly. The New York Times suing OpenAI and Microsoft for copyright infringement. Their core claim is that their vast archive of news articles, their intellectual property, was used without permission to train these large language models.
And if the AI can just spit out the information from those articles?
It poses a huge threat to their subscription model, and potentially to all news organizations that rely on people paying for original reporting and analysis. Why subscribe if the chatbot gives you the same info, maybe summarized or rephrased?
It undermines the whole economic basis of journalism.
Potentially, yes. And it goes beyond text. The technology can now learn and replicate a singer's unique voice print.
So AI could make Frank Sinatra sing a brand new song?
Technically, yes. Or replicate any distinctive voice to perform new material. We even saw that unsettling example of an AI generating a video of a Swedish politician fluently speaking Arabic, complete with matching facial expressions.
Wow, that blurs lines in politics, not just music.
Absolutely. It complicates intellectual property, creative identity, even political communication in profound ways. Who owns your voice, your style, your digital likeness? These are becoming urgent legal and ethical questions.
Okay, this leads us into the broader societal impact. Let's talk algorithms, power, and virtual dystopias. Sounds cheerful.
Well, it's critical to understand. Algorithms aren't just tools anymore. They're deeply embedded as gatekeepers and powerful tastemakers in our lives.
Shaping what we see and hear.
Constantly. Kyle Chayka's concept of filter world really captures this. Algorithms are ubiquitous mediators on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Spotify, Netflix. Almost every interaction, every moment of consumption is filtered algorithmically.
And our own activity feeds the beast.
Precisely. Every scroll, listen, click it contributes to the data streams that fuel other people's recommendations. It creates this interconnected, self-reinforcing web of algorithmic influence that subtly shapes our reality, our tastes, even our beliefs.
And this hits journalism hard, too.
Critically hard. Social media algorithms act as powerful filters for news. They determine what stories audiences see, and just as importantly, what they don't see.
Journalists must be aware of this.
Increasingly so. They develop their own folk theories, informal guesses about how these opaque algorithms work. And they're constantly caught in this negotiation, trying to uphold traditional journalistic values like newsworthiness and accuracy, while also feeling the pressure to create content that the algorithm will favor content that's clickable or likely to go viral.
So, a tension between informing the public and chasing engagement metrics.
A huge tension. Larger established news outlets might have more leeway, but for many, especially online-focused ones, the pressure is immense. It's a constant struggle between principles and clicks, potentially distorting the news landscape.
Then there's the issue of bias baked into the algorithms themselves.
Yes, and it's crucial how we frame this. Algorithmic bias isn't just a technical glitch, a bug in the code.
Yeah.
Our sources argue powerfully that we should see it as evidence of broader societal disparities.
Meaning the algorithm reflects biases already out there.
Exactly. When risk prediction tools say, for loan applications or bail hearings, systematically perform differently for different demographic groups. Maybe they consistently overestimate risk for marginalized communities despite individual merit. That's often not just a code flaw. It's reflecting historical patterns, redlining, discriminatory lending, bias policing data that was fed into the system during training.
So the algorithm learns the historical bias.
It learns from the data it's given, and if that data reflects societal bias, the algorithm will likely reproduce, and sometimes even amplify, that bias. This reframes bias not just as a problem in the algorithm, but as a diagnostic tool revealing problems in society.
Like holding up a mirror.
A mirror that can unfortunately perpetuate the reflection. The example of predictive policing in Chicago is stark. Algorithms trained on historical crime data, which itself reflects where police chose to patrol or make arrests in the past, often influenced by bias, can then direct more policing to those same areas, creating a feedback loop.
So understanding whose data is used, whose perspective is embedded, is key.
Absolutely. Understanding positionality is crucial to interpreting what the bias truly shows and how to design effective anti-discriminatory policies. It's not just about tweaking the algorithm. It's often about addressing the underlying systemic injustices it's learned to replicate.
And a lack of diversity among the people building these systems makes it worse.
Significantly contributes. If the design teams are homogeneous, they often have blind spots. They might not anticipate how a system could negatively impact groups they don't belong to or understand well. These biases get built right into the technological infrastructure, reinforcing inequalities.
Which brings us to the next frontier, immersive platforms, VR, AR.
IPs, offering potentially profound digital experiences, hyper-realistic gaming, virtual workplaces, social hubs, but they also crank up the privacy and ethical concerns several notches.
New frontier, old problems, amplified.
That's a good way to put it. The big concern is the sheer volume and intimacy of the data these platforms can collect.
More than just clicks and likes.
Way more. Precise eye movements, showing what you're looking at, how long, even pupil dilation, indicating interest or arousal. Subtle facial expressions revealing emotions, physiological responses like heart rate, skin conductance. This gives incredibly granular insight into your cognitive and emotional states.
This seems intensely personal.
It is. And this enhanced surveillance, combined with real-time algorithmic analysis, enables advertising that's not just targeted, but potentially highly manipulative, playing on subconscious responses. Beyond ads, it risks creating a pervasive surveillance society within these virtual worlds.
Where you feel watched all the time.
Exactly, leading to self-censorship, a chilling effect on authentic self-expression. You might alter your behavior, consciously or unconsciously, because you know you're being monitored and analyzed.
There's a term for this, machinic subjugation.
Yes, from Maurizio Lazzarato.
Yeah.
It's a powerful concept. It's not just us using machines anymore, it's about humans becoming integrated into the technological system. Our traditional social identities potentially blurred or overwritten by the platform's logic.
How does that work?
Algorithms on these platforms don't just passively recommend things. They actively shape interactions, create new roles, new subjectivities defined by the system. Think about platform workers in the gig economy. It's often hard to classify them under old labor laws because the algorithm manages and controls their work in ways that mimic but don't quite fit traditional employment. The algorithm becomes a kind of digital boss, exerting control,
A new form of power.
a very subtle, pervasive form. And IPs can also worsen the digital divide. You need expensive hardware, fast internet.
Reinforcing socioeconomic inequality. If you can't afford the gear, you're locked out.
Exactly. And they risk transferring existing power imbalances and prejudices into the virtual space. Algorithms might categorize users in limiting ways, hindering authentic self-expression, fostering what Sartre called bad faith, where you conform to roles or stereotypes imposed on you, rather than freely choosing your identity.
Okay, that sounds pretty bleak. Is there an alternative? A way to build these platforms differently?
Thankfully, yes. The sources propose a compelling alternative. Emancipatory, participatory, immersive platforms, or EPIPs. Okay, what makes them emancipatory?
It's a design theory focused explicitly on dismantling oppressive structures and empowering users. It's not just about technical fixes. It's about involving users as co-creators, co-owners, co-governors of these virtual spaces. A radical reimagining.
How would that work in practice?
EPIPs are built on 4 key critical theory tools for emancipation. Think of them as pillars. Freedom to act, agency, freedom to express dialogue, freedom to belong, inclusion, and freedom to think, rationality.
Agency, dialogue, inclusion, rationality.
Right. And these aren't just abstract ideals. They translate directly into concrete design principles for building more equitable digital worlds. Okay, give me some examples. How do you design for agency?
Promoting agency could mean building collaborative virtual marketplaces where users have real autonomy, maybe with inclusive features like localized pricing to counteract global economic inequalities. Protecting agency means ensuring users retain full ownership and control over their data and creations, maybe even giving them tools to commodify their own data if they choose, putting them in charge.
Putting the user back in control of their digital identity and assets.
Exactly. Then, promoting dialogue means designing for authentic, nuanced expression. Moving beyond simplistic likes, providing tools for complex self-representation, actively counteracting the tendency of algorithms to homogenize everything and foster diverse digital societies.
And inclusion.
Promoting inclusion means ensuring equitable access, tackling the hardware and bandwidth barriers, and empowering users to construct environments where they feel a sense of genuine belonging, overcoming the biases and stereotypes that might exist in the physical world or be replicated by less thoughtful algorithms.
So it's about consciously designing for freedom and fairness from the ground up.
Precisely. It's a proactive, ethical approach to building these incredibly powerful new platforms.
And thinking even broader, beyond individual platforms, AI has massive political implications too, right?
Huge ones. On one hand, you have the potential benefits AI could help optimize political processes, maybe lead to more rational, evidence-based policymaking, what some call value-based social engineering. Imagine AI analyzing vast data sets to model the likely impacts of different policies with unprecedented accuracy.
Sounds efficient. But the risks?
Significant and often unknown. The potential to undermine social cohesion, manipulate public opinion on a massive scale, erode democratic norms. It's all there. That's why you see things like the EU calling for a global AI charter. There's an urgent sense that we need international cooperation on ethical guidelines and risk management before the tech completely outpaces our ability to govern it wisely.
Especially when AI can generate convincing deepfakes, like that political speech example.
Exactly. It blurs the lines of communication, trust, and reality in ways that are deeply concerning for healthy political discourse.
It really is a complex, rapidly evolving landscape. The future seems to hang in the balance of how we handle this.
It truly does. How we design, regulate, and ethically integrate these incredibly powerful technologies will shape human interaction, self-expression, and the very nature of our societies for decades to come.
Okay. We've covered a huge amount of ground here. We've taken a really deep dive into this fascinating, complex, sometimes pretty unsettling intersection of the self, aesthetic experience, and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, we've seen how our understanding of consciousness itself is being refined by these new theories, like M. suggesting that dynamic, self-sensing core.
We explored neuroaesthetics, looking at how our brains process beauty and pleasure, finding reward in musical surprise and prediction.
And crucially, we've dissected how AI is throwing curveballs at traditional ideas of creativity, ownership, art itself, and even the fundamental structure of our digital lives and social interactions.
The unifying thread, the big takeaway, it seems, is just the profound, pervasive impact algorithms and advanced AI are having across the entire spectrum of human experience.
They're really not just passive tools anymore, are they?
Mm.
They're active agents, shaping our perceptions, influencing our judgments, mediating our relationships.
And sometimes, as we saw with bias and the potential downsides of immersive platforms, they risk replicating or even worsening existing inequalities. It demands our attention.
Absolutely.
So the final question then, maybe the most important one, is what does this all mean for you, the person listening, trying to navigate this world? As you journey through a reality where your sense of self is increasingly reflected back at you, analyzed, maybe even subtly nudged by algorithms, where that line between your online persona and who you feel you are gets blurrier, and where art can be conjured by machines, how do you consciously choose to engage with all of this?
It's a profound question. What does it mean for you, as a unique human being, to cultivate genuine self-awareness, to find authentic meaning, to express your own creativity, especially in this hybrid reality we're building, part physical, part virtual, and increasingly shaped by these powerful non-human intelligences?
This isn't just a debate for philosophers or tech gurus anymore, is it?
Not at all. It's a vital personal call to action, really. A call for greater awareness, for critical thinking, and for intentional agency in defining your own experience, and maybe playing a part in shaping a more human future.
Something to think about the next time you're scrolling through your feed, listening to a playlist, or seeing an image that seems just a bit too perfect.
Exactly. Ask yourself, what's truly happening here? What forces are at play? And what role are you choosing to play in it?